In the unyielding impressions of most, winged creatures are never meant to willingly still their beating wings, and the very concept of diligence always carries the heavy, suffocating burden of relentless toil. Yet, as the final sliver of the setting sun sank beneath the horizon of southern France, and the boundless sea of purple lavender gradually surrendered to the quietude of twilight, a single honeybee made the most anomalous choice. Rather than returning with his massive swarm to the warmth, security, and rigid order of the hive, he chose to remain alone in the depths of this infinite wilderness, letting the cold night dew slowly drench the wings he had once borne with immense pride. Tonight, by the gentle, dancing glow of the hearth, let us immerse ourselves in this tale that requires no effort to remember, and wander together into the true chronicle of his life. This honeybee was known to the night watchers of the ancient forest as Ander. He was once the champion of his colony, flying the highest and harvesting the most, his existence originally nothing less than a ceaseless symphony of precise calculations. Yet at this very moment, he merely perches in absolute stillness upon the stamen of a blooming lavender bud. He no longer calculates the wind's speed, no longer navigates his course, and no longer resists the encroaching, irreversible chill of the night. His life did not follow the scripted path toward the zenith of prosperity. Instead, with an exquisitely solitary yet profoundly graceful posture, wrapped in a blanket of starlight and a wisp of delicate fragrance, he softly drifted into an eternal sleep. This is by no means a tragic loss or a bewildered straying, but rather a grand farewell he had long contemplated and willingly embraced, a midnight parable of letting go, of healing, and of returning to the embrace of the earth. The fractures of destiny often manifest within the most imperceptible moments of the mundane. For Ander, it occurred on an otherwise ordinary afternoon in the height of midsummer. In those days, Ander possessed the sturdiest, translucent wings in the entire hive. His sharp compound eyes could effortlessly decode the most intricate play of light and shadow within the foliage, and he had never committed a single error in his grueling labor. The will of the hive was absolute. Every individual was bound to a meticulously prescribed trajectory. From dawn to dusk, they were forced to operate like gears within a clockwork mechanism, shuttling untiringly between the blossoms and the comb. Ander have once devoutly revered this cosmic order, believing that the entire purpose of existence was distilled within that viscous, sickly sweet honey, until the day he soared into a hidden valley on the fringes of Provence, a sanctuary untouched by any living soul. At the threshold of that deep ravine, there were no manicured, orderly farmlands, but only vast stretches of wild lavender growing with fierce, untamed passion, exhaling a rich, heady fragrance under the blazing sun that felt almost achingly lonely. Just as Ander habitually prepared to descend and begin his numb, mechanical harvesting, a sudden mountain breeze swept through. This was no ordinary wind, for it carried the moisture of distant oceans and the ancient, primal breath of the deep earth. The gale caused a massive lavender stem to sway violently. To stabilize his body in mid-air, Ander had to beat his wings with all his might, and in that fleeting split second, his compound eyes captured a spectacle he had never before envisioned. He witnessed tens of thousands of purple blossoms bowing in perfect unison before rising together in the wind, a rhythm that belonged to no command of the hive, but was rather a grand, liberated, and incomprehensibly serene cadence of nature. Ander's wings faltered in a curious, hesitant pause. A novel sensation of aching bloomed from the depths of his chest. It was not physical exhaustion, but rather the audible fracturing of a once indestructible belief. For the first time in his life, he forgot to harvest pollen. He simply hovered motionless in mid-air, watching a solitary wild flower dance in the breeze as if no one were watching. At that moment, the jarring mechanism of the bustling daytime tore a crack in his heart that could never be mended. The days following his return from the deep valley shifted into something uncomfortably different. The airtight, suffocating discipline within the hive began to instill in Ander a sense of inescapable entrapment. Every morning, as tens of thousands of his peers beat their wings simultaneously in the freezing dawn, the collective roar resembled a low, menacing thunder, driving every soul to immerse themselves back into the endless, grinding depletion for the greater collective. Marching in the middle of the columns, Ander gazed at the hollow, numb expressions of the comrades around him who only knew how to mechanically replicate the same motions. Suddenly, an immense wave of desolation and profound loneliness washed over him. While his physical form continued to execute commands with flawless precision, his heart remained tethered to that secluded valley of wild lavender, floating upon that mountain breeze infused with the scent of the sea. The web of power and regimentation was woven densely throughout the labyrinth of the hive. Overseers stood vigil at the entryways, scrutinizing every brought-back yield. Any pollen pellet deemed insufficiently plump was ruthlessly discarded, often accompanied by low, harsh reprimands. Ander began to deliberately avoid the most bountiful yet chaotic sunflower fields. Instead, he frequented that remote lavender valley, even though it demanded a significantly longer and more taxing flight. During these long, solitary journeys, he began to notice the subtle temperature shifts as sunlight kissed his wings. He began to comprehend the whispering sighs of the wind combing through pine needles. These were the very noises he had rigidly ignored in his past pursuit of sheer efficiency. He formed a silent, unspoken bond with an ancient lavender plant rooted in the crevice of a weathered rock. Having braved countless torrential storms, its petals bore a muted, ash-toned, and beautifully stoic shade of deep violet. Whenever Ander landed coordinates weary upon its petals, the old lavender would gracefully bend its stalk, utilizing its cool, soothing aroma to tenderly envelop his dust-laden body. In these brief, stolen interludes, Ander had no need to map out the convoluted tunnels of the hive, nor did he care whether he lagged behind his peers. Cradled within the embrace of this single flower, he simply rediscovered the natural rhythm of his own breath. The footsteps of summer grew imperceptibly heavy, and the atmosphere of Provence began to waft with the complex, bittersweet scent of crops ripening and veering toward inevitable decay. The climate inside the hive grew unprecedentedly fraught. With winter stealthily encroaching, the administrative caste fanatically exploited the lower foraging workforce, demanding the accumulation of ever greater stockpiles. The margins of Ander's wings had developed tiny, tattered notches, battle scars left by prolonged friction against fierce gales and rough branches. His movements were no longer as effortlessly weightless and flawless as they had been in the spring. On an afternoon heavy with the promise of an impending thunderstorm, the hive broadcasted its final, desperate mobilization order. Every bee was deployed to the distant rapeseed fields to plunder the last abundant resources of the season. But Ander did not obey. At the exact instant of takeoff, he altered his trajectory. Amidst a breathtaking, defiant silence, he flew against the headwind, swaying unsteadily toward the lavender valley that truly belonged to him. The sky darkened like a colossal shroud, heavy, ominous clouds hung low, and lightning silently lacerated the night sky behind distant mountain ridges. The air was thick with the briny moisture and suffocating tension of the approaching tempest. Ander was tossed upward and plunged downward by the tempest like a withered leaf. His fragile body appeared infinitesimally small against the monolithic forces of nature. Every single flap of his wings demanded the absolute depletion of his remaining strength. When he finally tumbled onto that familiar, deep purple lavender plant, the heavens broke, and a torrential downpour unleashed its fury, colossal raindrops battering the surrounding leaves with a dull, thundering roar. The old lavender strained every fiber to erect a tiny, dry sanctuary for Ander, using its broad leaves and dense, spike-like clusters, shielding him fiercely within its innermost core. In this microworld insulated from the deluge, Ander listened to the apocalyptic symphony outside, yet his soul experienced a sublime, unprecedented tranquility he had never known since birth. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had chosen correctly. The rain ceased abruptly at midnight. The night sky, newly cleansed of storm clouds, loomed exceptionally high and crystal clear. The magnificent Milky Way resembled a glowing river cascading across deep blue velvet, gazing silently down upon the waking earth. Ander crawled slowly out from the protective canopy of the lavender. Standing on the lip of a glistening, wet petal, he looked out across the Provençal plains, washed so clean by the rain they seemed almost transparent. The air was rich with the perfume of damp soil and vegetation. He attempted to test his wings, only to find that his right wing had been severely mangled during the prior gale. It could no longer sustain him for a long-distance flight, rendering a return to that high and mighty hive utterly impossible. Had this occurred in the past, such a discovery would have triggered his most visceral terror. Within the ruthless paradigm of the hive, an individual stripped of flight was deemed devoid of utility, destined for cold, unceremonious execution. But now, beholding the star-studded canopy above and the lavender beneath exhaling an aura of infinite absolution, not a single ripple of panic stirred in Ander's heart. Instead, he felt a profound, liberating lightness. Those heavy responsibilities that once starved him of breath, those relentless marathons performed merely to serve an artificial grand narrative, all surrendered their power to shackle him in the presence of these broken wings. He was no longer a flawless implement of labor, he was merely a minuscule life form resting on an ordinary summer night within the boundless expanse of nature, no different from a single blossom or a stray wisp of wind. The old lavender swayed gently in the nocturnal breeze, generating a soft, rustling murmur, as if whispering ancient, tender consolations to him, a language that required no vocalization, but rather flowed directly through its perfume. Anders slowly closed his compound eyes. The cosmos began to shrink within his perception, narrowing until it consisted only of the velvety texture of the petal beneath him and that faint, purple breeze capable of smoothing away all spiritual anguish. The first pristine glint of dawn pierced through the morning mist, illuminating this ancient, peaceful wilderness of Provence. A new day arrived precisely on schedule, pausing its stride for the departure of no soul. Deep within the heart of that dark purple wild lavender, Anders lay in perfect stillness. His tiny body no longer stirred. Upon his gold and black velvet fur, a few crystal-clear beads of morning dew had quietly gathered. Beside him, several petals that had fiercely sheltered him from the storm the night before had fulfilled their sacred duty. They detached gently from the stem and drifted downward, meticulously blanketing Anders' form. He did not return to that prosperous hive built of gold and rigid doctrines, he returned himself, unreservedly, to this purple soil that cradles countless births and accommodates infinite deaths. The enigma of why he chose to remain alone in the twilight would likely never be understood by his peers in the hive, they would merely chalk it up to an accidental disorientation or the natural culling of the weak. Yet to this vast prairie, and to that specific aroma of lavender that had kept him company through the dead of night, Anders had composed the most flawless, liberated, and quiet movement of his life symphony. Through his ultimate choice, he proved that the grandest victory in life is sometimes not flying the highest or journeying the farthest, but having the courage, at the perfect moment, to permit oneself to stop and dissolve into tranquility. The breeze swept through once more, and the undulating sea of purple across the hills rolled like waves, carrying away all noise and weariness, leaving only an eternal silence tailor-made for the slumber of all exhausted souls. Now, the tale has reached its destination, and that warm, purple fragrance seems to be drifting softly into your room, gently cradling your thoughts that have been wound tight all day. The hearth fire has gradually died down, and the world outside has surrendered to stillness. Relinquish all your attachments and burdens, like the little bee who finally discovered his true home, let yourself drift into a peaceful, deep, and heavy sleep.